Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and that, of course, is from the world-famous Broadway musical, Fiddler on the Roof, which premiered on September 22nd, 1964, and became the first Broadway show ever to run more than 3,000 performances, and for nearly 10 years, Fiddler on the Roof had the distinction of being the longest-running Broadway musical. The show was nominated for 10 Tony Awards. It won 9 of them, including Best Musical, Best Score, Best Direction, Best Choreography. The original Tevye was played by the incomparable Zero Mostel, who won the Tony Award for his portrayal and who left an imprint on the character, so that many people who've played Tevye subsequently are actually not portraying Tevye at all, but are portraying Zero Mostel's interpretation of Tevye. They're playing Zero Mostel playing Tevye. Zero Mostel was followed by Herschel Bernardi. Some greats have played the role: Theodore Bikel, Harry Goz. In London, the role was played by the great Israeli who won the Tony Award for his portrayal, Topol, who of course then played the role in the Norman Jewison movie version of Fiddler on the Roof, and Topol won an Oscar for that role. The show, which is based on Shalom Aleicham's Tevye and His Daughters, on Broadway was produced by the legendary Hal Prince. The director-choreographer was another Broadway legend, the late Jerome Robbins. The music was by Jerry Bach, the book was by Joseph Stein, and the lyrics, which may be the most often quoted Broadway show lyrics of all time. The lyrics to "If I Were a Rich Man." When you're rich, they think you really know. Do you love me? After 25 years, it's nice to know. And L'Chaim, oh, L'Chaim. And if our good fortune never comes, here's to whatever comes. Drink L'Chaim to life, and on and on. The Tony Award-winning lyricist of Fiddler on the Roof is a Broadway musical genius, Sheldon Harnick, who's been in the business for more than half a century, is the winner of 3 Tony Awards, and helped create such Broadway masterpieces as Fiorello, which won a Pulitzer, and She Loves Me, and on and on and on. And as Sheldon Harnick joins us on L'Chaim, he is now in his 90th year and going strong. In fact, Sheldon Harnick just released a new album called Sheldon Harnick, Hidden Treasures, 1949 to 2013, which includes Sheldon singing some of his own popular songs and others from his private collection. And Sheldon, as someone who loves Broadway, and our audience knows, I've been privileged enough to be involved in Broadway and to love Broadway, and not only that, I had the personal, exquisite joy of playing Tevye for 7 weeks in a Connecticut production.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
What an enormous thrill it is for me to have you at this table. Yeah. Thank you for being kind enough to join. I just revere you, and I'm so pleased to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for all the lovely things you've said about me.
And they're all true and more.
I know, but thank you anyway.
There's so much I want to learn. I want to talk about you first, then we'll talk a little bit about Fiddler, which again, as we're sitting together, is celebrating its 50th anniversary. But, you began writing lyrics. And instantly, do you play a musical instrument?
I did play violin.
Okay. How do you come to be, spending so much of your professional life and your life as a whole writing lyrics. When does that begin for you?
Well, for me, it began writing doggerel verse, but both my sister, I have an older sister, Gloria, 2 years older, we both began to write poetry because of my mother.
Really?
My mother celebrated every bar mitzvah, every wedding. She would write a verse to the person who was celebrating.
What was your mother's name?
Esther.
Esther.
Yeah, Esther Cantor. And before she married my father, Harry Harnick. And so my sister and I began to write verse also. My sister was really a splendid poet. And in fact, while she was in high school, we come from Chicago, there was a citywide contest. And she was one of 5 winners. There were thousands of entries, yeah. She was really a good poet.
And again, her name?
Gloria.
Gloria.
So I didn't want to compete with her. I didn't feel that I could go in that direction. So I began to write what I hoped was comic verse. And I still remember when I was in grammar school, one of my early efforts was for Thanksgiving, "The turkey has my sympathy. Why must we be so mean? What has the turkey done that he deserves the guillotine?" You know, I think I was 8 when I wrote that. So it was just fun.
It just came out of you, didn't it?
Yeah, it was fun to write verse.
That's lovely.
And I kept it up. When I was in high school, I met a classmate whose family was involved in the Little Theater movement in Chicago. And he introduced me to that, and we began to write together parodies and whatnot. And when I was drafted into the Army in World War II, I kept doing that. I kept writing verse. I started to write songs based on my own Army experiences because it was fun.
Yes.
It was just fun.
Did you write the melodies as well?
At that time, I was writing the melodies as well.
And how did you write if you don't play an instrument?
Oh, I did play an instrument. I was a violinist.
But you don't normally compose on the violin, do you? Does one?
No, no, and that was something I had to learn slowly and rather painfully, because the first piano accompaniments that I tried to write were so complex that when I heard them played, I thought, oh my God, I'm doing all the singer's work too. I'm kind of drowning out the singer. There's no room for her or him. So little by little, I learned how to write a piano accompaniment.
Okay. You've told us about your mother, Esther.
Yeah.
And what kind of home do you and your sister grow up in Chicago? And to what extent does it have? You said already that your mother was writing verses for bar mitzvah ceremonies. I would be curious to know what kind of Jewish setting you grew up in.
We did not live in a Jewish neighborhood, but there were enough Jewish people in the neighborhood to form a synagogue. And the first quarters of the synagogue were in just a hall upstairs of a secretarial school. So I remember that's where I was bar mitzvah. And I remember when I started working on Fiddler, I remembered the older men in the synagogue and the passion, the fervor with which they prayed. Our rabbi, Rabbi Glick, was a young man who loved children. And at one time, I wanted to be a rabbi because I wanted to be like Rabbi Glick.
Sheldon, you wanted to be a rabbi?
Oh, yeah. And he directed the plays. I remember I was Mattathias in a Hanukkah play, and I came out, I had a long beard. I was 9 years old, and I was horrified because when I walked out, I heard the audience giggling. And I thought, I haven't even begun to act yet. Why are they giggling, you know? So, and then Rabbi Glick, who was a very personable, very smart man, he got a better job at a better paying synagogue, so he left. And we had a rabbi, well, I won't give you his name, but he reminded me of Charles Lawton as Captain Bligh. And I lost interest a bit. But when I was working on Fiddler, all those memories came back.
That is lovely. Instantly, one of the reasons I wanted to know something about your Jewish background is it does lead me to some questions about Fiddler. But just stay with your childhood one more time.
Yeah.
What was your father's name?
Harry.
Harry. And do you feel that your mother and father created for you and your sister a Jewish home? And incidentally, the synagogue you were part of, was it Orthodox?
It meant to be Orthodox.
Okay.
It didn't quite live up to the orthodoxy it aspired to.
I understand. So what was for example, did you have Shabbat at home? Do you have warm feelings about Judaism?
I did,
as a child.
I did. But the only kind of Judaism we observed at home, they did not observe the Sabbath. The only thing they did was dietary. They kept very strict dietary rules.
So you observed kashrut in your home?
Yes, and that's why I was always a little shocked when we ate out, and on occasion my father would order ham and eggs.
Yes.
So
the home was kosher, but not necessarily when they went out to eat.
Yeah. I do remember we were brought up that way, so that across the alley from us, I had a good friend who was not Jewish, and I went to a birthday party at his home, and there were plates of food out, and I thought one of them was corned beef. And I was eating it, and my friend came over and he said, "Oh, are you enjoying the ham?" And I thought, "This is ham?" And I went outside and I threw up. Yeah.
I relate to that story. I have a similar story, so I understand exactly what it was like. What about Passover? Do you have any warm memories about your own Passover Seders?
We always celebrated Passover at my grandmother's, my mother's mother, and it was a large family. We have a photograph I treasure. It looked like the pipes of Pan. I mean, there was just from the smallest to the largest. And those were, I always look forward to Passover there. My grandfather had died, and so my grandmother really conducted the ceremony. And she got very impatient with the rest of us when we giggled or when we talked. It was just fun around the table. Nobody could be totally sober,
Yeah.
But the food was wonderful. And the feeling, the telling of the story was important.
So the overarching question is for you, as you look back at your childhood, do you feel you were given a strong sense of Jewish identity? I'm not talking about observance here. I'm talking about, what is Sheldon Harnick's core? To what extent do you feel that in your core it begins with Jewishness? To what extent, because many people of your generation also grew up and their core they thought was American. And I'm curious where you fall.
I had a very strong sense of my Jewish identity. As a matter of fact, it was drummed into me. Not far away was a little Italian kid. And when I was fairly small, I avoided him at all costs because when he saw me, he would jump on me, throw me to the ground, and hit me, not hard, but just enough to know I was being hit. And he would say, "Christ killer, Christ killer." And I complained to my parents, they complained to his parents, so it didn't happen very often, but it was shocking.
Yes, it is. Did you deal with much anti-Semitism as a child?
No, although it was not a Jewish neighborhood, that was not an anti-Semitic neighborhood, I was very sensitive about it. For instance, in grammar school, I remember one of my friends was named Sammy Rubnik, he was a little Jewish boy, and he was not good at math. And our English teacher was bawling him out one day for some mistake he'd made in the homework. And she said, "But your people are supposed to be so good at percentages." And I thought, how dare she,
Yes. In your professional career, did you ever deal with anti-Semitism?
No, in the theater, it's just non-existent.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So the arc of your professional life, you're writing lyrics even before you meet Jerry Bach. But when you meet him, there's some form of chemistry there, yes?
Yes. I was introduced to him by an actor who he's one of the people who's really missed, a man named Jack Cassidy. He was wonderful. And Jack had worked with Jerry Bach, I think, at the Camp Tamament. So I was called in to try and there was a musical version of Shangri-La. And the writers were a team, Lawrence and Lee, but the show was in trouble. And before they came back to Broadway, they had to stay out on the road longer to try and fix the show. And Lawrence and Lee were already scheduled to work on Mame. So they left the show, and they needed a lyricist just in case there was anything that needed to be written. So I got called in. And I met Jack, and he said, "You have to meet my friend Jerry Bach. He's just split with his lyricist, and he's looking for a lyricist." So we were introduced.
Who was Jerry writing with before? Do you remember?
His name was Larry Holofcener.
Okay.
And he was very good. But they wrote there was a plum assignment. Everybody wanted it. Sammy Davis was doing a show, Mr. Wonderful. And although the second act was his nightclub act, the first act was a musical, and all of us wanted it, but Jerry Bach and Larry Hollofcenter got to do it. Some kind of problem arose on the road. I'm not sure what it was, but it was enough to break up their partnership. And after that, Jerry was looking for someone. And I was ready to work with someone else. I had been writing my own music and lyrics, but when I came to New York, my hero was a writer named Yip Harburg, who had done Finian's Rainbow.
Yip Harburg, right.
Yeah. And
how did you know, when you say he was your hero, you didn't know him personally?
I didn't know him personally.
You respected his work.
Well, what had happened, when I went, one of the reasons I went to Northwestern University was they had a wonderful student review. Yes. So I went there, and the first year I was there, one of my songs was accepted for that. And the performer who performed it was a wonderfully talented young woman named Charlotte Ray. She had a nice career on television later. But Charlotte we became friends. And I think it was my junior or senior year, she had gone to New York over the Christmas holiday. And when she came back, she sought me out, and she was holding an LP and said, "Sheldon, you have to listen to this, you particularly." And she loaned me her copy of Finian's Rainbow. So I listened to it.
A marvelous musical.
And I thought, the music is wonderful, but it was the lyrics that just blew me away. And I thought, suddenly, I would rather do this than be a professional violinist. I was studying violin at Northwestern. And so he was my hero from that show. When I came to New York—
He did the lyrics?
He did the lyrics. Burton Lane did the wonderful music. Yip's other famous accomplishment, he did the lyrics to The Wizard of Oz. Anyway, Charlotte was working at the Village Vanguard in New York, and she called me and she said, through a friend, they had invited Yip Harburg to come down. So she said, if you want to meet him, come. And I did. I asked him whether I could audition for him, and he said, sure. So I got myself a pianist, because I couldn't accompany myself on the violin while I was sang. And I went to Yip's apartment. Most of what I played was college stuff, but he saw talent there, and he was wonderfully encouraging. I had my score of Finian's Rainbow, which he signed, and he did something that was just so generous. 3 days later, I got a greeting card from him, and I opened it up, and on the front of the card, there's a picture of a harp player, a barefooted harp player playing the harp. But inside, I read the message. It said, "Dear Sheldon, I'm sure you'll succeed if you keep whanging that lyre," signed Yip, which was just such a generous thing to do.
Yes. It's amazing how encouragement from someone like this can be life-changing, don't you think?
You remind me of, yes, it can, and you remind me of something else. When I was in high school, we had a large high school, and there were two choruses. One was a large chorus, and one was 60 voices. It was called the solo chorus. And I was a member of that chorus, and it was wonderful fun. It was very exciting to be in that chorus. So I decided I would try and write a piece for them. And I got a poem. I found a poem that I liked, and I started to write a choral piece. And very quickly, I got into trouble. I didn't know what I was doing. The man who conducted the chorus taught at one of the prestigious Chicago music schools. He looked like Stokowski. They called him the Duke. His name was Leroy Wetzel. I made an appointment with him, and I went to his office, and I said, "Mr. Wetzel, would you look at this, and could you give me some help?" So I gave him what I'd written, and he looked at it, and he went, "Ha, ha, 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 ha," handed it back and dismissed me. Years later, when I was in therapy, I told this story to my therapist, and to my surprise, I started to sob. It was just so painful and so hurtful, and he didn't know what he did.
Mm-hmm. That's a very powerful story, Sheldon. Yeah. Sheldon, do you have a family of your own?
Yes. I have a son and a daughter. My daughter lives, unfortunately, she lives across the country in Malibu.
I understand what that means, unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah.
And your son, where is he?
We have a house in East Hampton. I live in New York, but we do have a house in East Hampton, New York, and he's kind of the caretaker now. So nice. We go out every weekend, and
Who's
he's also my wife and I. My wife, Marjorie.
Marjorie?
Yeah. And our son, Matt, He's like a cordon bleu chef, so when we go out there, he cooks
How
for
lovely.
us. How lovely
yes.
indeed, yeah.
So now I want to talk a little bit about Fiddler on the Roof.
Okay.
And you and Jerry write a number of shows even before Fiddler on the Roof. You do Body Beautiful. You do Fiorello, which is a huge show that you do.
Yeah.
A fabulous show about the mayor, yes?
The mayor of New York,
You do Tenderloin.
whatever his name was.
Right. You do a Tenderloin. And then you do She Loves Me, which was also a wonderful, wonderful show. And the lyrics there are fabulous. That was 63. And then 64, you do Fiddler on the Roof. One question in general. You and Jerry, was your goal just to be writing and creating all the time? And that was how you earned a living. Is that what you wanted to do all the time? You wanted to be, you did one show, it went up, now we go on to the next show.
I loved working with Jerry, and I assume he loved working with me. And that's true. We just wanted, when one show was done, good, on to the next.
Yes.
Constantly looking for ideas for
Okay.
musicals.
So how does Fiddler on the Roof come to the two of you?
It started when some friend of mine, and I cannot remember who it is, sent me a book by Shalom Aleichem. It was called Wandering Star, about a Yiddish theatrical troupe wandering all over Eastern Europe. Big fat book, and I loved it. So I gave it to Jerry Bach to read. He loved it, and we thought, this could be a musical. Who would be the right person to do the book? And we thought, Joe Stein. We had worked with Joe on The Body Beautiful. So we gave it to Joe. Joe read it, and he said, it is too big. There's too many characters. And in order to get it on the stage, you would have to eliminate a lot of the characters, and a lot of the character of the book would be gone. He said, so it's just too big. But we love the writing, so let's see what else Shalom Aleichem has written. And we looked, and we found the Tevye's daughter stories and thought, that's what we want to do.
Interesting.
Unfortunately, at that time, the rights were not available. There was a playwright named Arnold Pearl who had written a play. It may have been called Tevye's Daughters, and it was being performed. There used to be a theater below Carnegie Hall, and so we went to see it. It was interesting because it was 3 acts, and each act was about one daughter. And if you only saw one act, you wouldn't have known that Tevye had a family. So we got in touch with Arnold Pearl, and for a while, he was being impossible because he thought we were basing our musical on his play. And finally, it should have been an easy problem to solve, but it wasn't until Joe Stein said, wait a minute, let me send him my script. So he sent him the script, and then Arnold Pearl read it and said, oh. He said, I see, you're basing this on Shalom Aleichem. So then we worked out a deal with him. He participates in the royalty scheme. And as a matter of fact, anytime you see a poster, under the title, you will see by special arrangement with Arnold Pearl.
Ah.
So we did get the rights. We started to work on it, and it was just a joy for all of us. When I tell you what our original title was, you will know what it meant to us. Our original title was Where Papa Came From.
Where Papa
Because
came from.
all of our fathers had come from the old country. Mine, as a matter of fact, had a very sad story.
What is it?
His father came to America, and like many people, he said, when I establish myself, I send for you and your mother. They never saw him again. He just never sent for them. My father came to this country when he was 15, looking for his father. Didn't find him.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like here you got 3 Jewish guys who are going to make a play out of a Shalom Aleichem book, and that the Jewish dimension of this sort of meant something to you. And I don't want to romanticize it. I want to know the extent to which that's true. To what extent was the fact that, when you do Fiorello, it's not about a Jew, it's about an Italian. She Loves Me, it's not about Jews. Fiddler on the Roof Shalom Aleichem is the quintessential Jewish author, Yiddish writer, and now you're going to create what is going to become the play, the book, the movie, musical, most associated with the Jewish tradition and the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. 3 Jewish guys are doing this. You get the rights from, I guess, a 4th Jew. To what extent was the Jewishness?
And a 5th Jew, Jerome Robbins.
That's right.
Yeah.
To what extent was this in some way, and I without over romanticizing it, I want to know whether the Jewish dimension of this in any way meant something to you guys?
Oh, absolutely. It meant something because we all had memories of growing up Jewish and what Judaism meant to us. And we didn't shy away from the fact that it was a Jewish show. On the other hand, what we found in Sholem Aleichem were universal values. And we thought, because this is going to Broadway, without downplaying its Jewishness, we do want to emphasize the universality of it. There was another a small detail. While we were working on it, there was a cabaret performer named Lenny Bruce, and he was getting a lot of adverse publicity. I was curious about his act, so I went to see him, and he used a lot of profanity. That didn't bother me because the profanity was he invented characters, and the profanity sounded right for those characters. What did bother me was that in between his set pieces, when he just talked to the audience, he would throw in a lot of Yiddish words. And people all over the cabaret saying, what did he say? What did he say? So I told this to Joe and Jerry, and we agreed, we said we will use maybe 2 or 3 Hebrew or Yiddish phrases, and that's all. And those have to be presented in such a way that the audience will know what they mean.
Brilliant.
So that, for instance, when I wrote the lyrics for L'chaim,
yes.
I thought, to life, L'chaim. It's the translation is built in. Even so, I wasn't in the theater that night, but I was told that when Jacqueline Kennedy saw the show, somebody might have said Mazel Tov. Whatever the word was, she turned to the person next to her and said, what did that mean? And people from rows all around her said, it means congratulations, good luck, you know. So we were always very aware of the Jewishness. And the disappointment, in a way, was that there was very little dialogue in the Sholem Aleichem stories that could be used. One of Joe Stein's remarkable accomplishments was that he had to invent, I think, about 95% of the dialogue. And one of the critics said, well, Joe Stein's job was easy. All he had to do was quote Sholem Aleichem, you know.
And it wasn't that at all.
And it wasn't that at
Right.
all, yeah. So, but he made it sound as though it would have been written by Sholem Aleichem.
It's a brilliant book.
Yeah.
In some way, did you worry that it was too Jewish? Did anybody say to you, come on, this is not going to work? It's not, it is. They did not realize how it would be embraced universally. And so I'm wondering whether anybody ever said to you, it's too Jewish. You
Oh,
can't do it."
absolutely. As a matter of fact, the first time somebody made fun of the idea, Jerry Bach and I had gone to London for a production of She Loves Me there. And Fiddler had been announced. And some columnist wrote in his column, have you ever had a worse idea? Can you picture Tevye tap dancing on top of his milk cans? And at the backers' auditions, a lot of the women who were in charge of the groups that bought tickets were Jewish. And they were quite concerned because they said to Hal Prince, you know, this seems like a very dark show. There's a pogrom at the end of the first act. There's an exile at the end of the second act. And Hal had to work his tail off saying, we've got Zero Mostel, there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of dancing. Jerry Robbins' dancing is brilliant. The score is wonderful. So the show is going to be a lot of fun, you know. They were worried. And we were all worried whether it would be accepted, whether it was too Jewish. When we went to Detroit for our pre-Broadway tour, we were worried for a number of reasons. One, Hal Prince told us he had made a deal with the theater owner in Detroit. We had to be there for 5 weeks, but he only had a 3.5-week subscription. So for the last week and a half, there wasn't a ticket sold. We thought we could die there. We get to Detroit, there's a newspaper strike. And we thought, oh my God, we are going to die here. And I think the reason that we succeeded was not because the show was not that good in Detroit. We had a lot of work to do. The reason we succeeded was because of Zero Mostel's performance. Apparently, people saw the show and said, you've got to see Zero Mostel. So that by the end of the 3.5 weeks, we were doing about 85% business, and it kept growing. By the time we finished, we were selling out. But opening night,
In Broadway? On Broadway?
in Detroit.
In Detroit.
Our first performance anywhere. Show ran long because there was just too much in it. and the curtain came down, I think, about 11:45. People were leaving, but the good thing is they were walking up the aisle backwards. They wanted to see the show until they had to leave. After the show was over, Joe Stein told me that at intermission, he had gone into the men's room, and there were two rather wealthy men standing there. And one of them said to the other, if I'd have known this was a Jewish show, I wouldn't have come. You know, so.
And then, ironically, it becomes a show that almost every group can identify with because of the universal theme played out in a Jewish context. Yes?
Yes, yeah. One of the best audiences we had, I went because it was an audience that it was a benefit, totally composed of priests and nuns. And it's one of the best audiences we had. Their response to everything was just so enthusiastic.
I also heard it played well in Japan.
It did. My wife and I went to see both productions that they had. And we were told that what it meant to them, in the story, of course, the young people adopt values and traditions which are foreign to what Tevye believed, and it's his difficulty in dealing with that. In Japan, we were told, before the war, there'd been a very strict family situation. After World War II, the young people began to break away, and it was extremely difficult for them.
And that's the universal theme that touches so many people regardless of their community. I'm going to come back to the theme in one moment. And I've had the privilege of speaking to you a couple of times, and we've sort of touched on it. I want to delve more. But I want you to talk one more moment about Zero Mostel. First of all, it's fascinating to me, a producer didn't come to you first and say, I have an idea of putting a show together, and would you and Jerry do it? You and Jerry really had the idea of creating this show, correct?
And Joe Stein.
And Joe Stein. But you went to Joe.
Yeah.
And then Joe helped decide which of Shalom Aleichem's works to use.
Well, it was because Joe said the first the book was not right that we looked for the other.
And you found the right book.
Yeah.
There was already a movie, by the way.
It was out of print. And Joe was very amused that he found copies at O'Malley's bookstore.
There was already the Maurice Schwartz movie, correct, of Tevye, black and white Yiddish?
But of just one story.
That is correct. Yeah. That is correct.
Yeah, Jerry Robbins got us a copy of that. We watched it.
Okay. So here you have this idea. You have to deal with the fact that some people are going to say it's too Jewish. You're determined to do this show now. And then you end up casting Zero Mostel. I want you to just reflect on that. He's not the only person who could have played the role.
We didn't want him.
You didn't want him?
No, Jerry Bach and I had worked with Herschel Bernardi, and he's the one we wanted. No, Howard Da Silva, as a matter of fact. Howard had been in Fiorello. If I'm not mistaken, I think he won a Tony for his role. Anyway, he was the one we wanted, and we had seen him do an off-Broadway production, The World of Shalom Aleichem, where he was a little bookseller. So when we spoke to Jerry Robbins, we said, we would love Howard Da Silva. And it was Robbins who said, Howard's wonderful, but Howard is life-size. I think Tevye should be larger than life, and that's why I want Zero Mostel, because he'd worked with him in Forum.
That is fascinating for me to hear. You know, many people like the performance that Herschel Bernardi did following Zero Mostel
on the
Broadway
favorite.
stage. He was not larger than life.
No.
So it's interesting. Although Jerry Robbins wanted an actor bigger than life, it worked either way.
Yeah.
But then you heard me say in the open that for so many people, the image they have of Tevye is Zero Mostel.
No, I disagree with you.
Please.
I disagree with you because Zero did not play it that long. I don't know whether you're aware of this, but sometime prior to his being in Fiddler, Zero had been run over by a bus. He was waiting for a taxi cab on a February day at a bus stop, and when the bus came along, there was slush there. The bus ran up over the curb, ran him over. He was taken to the hospital, and he was still conscious when he heard the doctor say, we have to amputate. And he begged the doctor, he said, I'm a performer, save the leg. So they did. But after 8 months, he just couldn't do 8 performances a week. So we got a letter from we being Hal Prince and the rest of us, we got a letter saying he wanted to play it for 3 months and then be out of it for 3 months. And Hal said, nobody will buy tickets. So Hal, after 8.5 months, he left the show, and Hal put him into a road company where he could do 3 and 4 performances a week. He just couldn't do it. So that not that many people saw him. And the only Tevye who followed him, who really did Zero Mostel, was the man who'd been his understudy, Paul Lipson. Mm-hmm. Paul played it, I think for a while, Paul was in the book of records as more performances than anybody. And when you saw Paul, you saw Zero. But none of the other people did Zero. I'm not even sure how many of them had seen him. And Tupple certainly didn't, and Herschel Bernardi didn't, nor did Harry Goss. There were some things they did that when Zero did If I Were a Rich Man.
That is
some
correct.
of the movement that he invented.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, they all did that.
The digga.
Yeah.
I have seen, and by the way, maybe it happens more on an unprofessional level, on a non-professional level. Maybe that's true, and I hadn't thought of it. By the way, I saw Fiddler with Herschel Bernardi. Mm-hmm. I didn't get to see it with Zero Mostel. And I thought, from what my understanding is, he played it very differently. And in some way, a more serious Jewish portrayal than Zero Mostel. And I once had the chance to speak to Theodore Bickel, who of course has played...
He's my cousin.
He's your cousin?
Yeah.
So Theodore Bickel and I are talking about his role when he plays Fiddler on the Roof. And what he said to me was, he plays it very differently because primarily Zero Mostel saw himself as a comedian who was playing a serious role. When I say serious, I don't necessarily mean every moment in the play is serious. And that Theodore Bickel sees himself as an actor who sometimes does comedic work. And that Theodore Bickel was trying to say to me, it's a very different perspective if one comes to that role, either as a comedian or as a straight-up actor. Yeah. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. The first time I saw Theo play the role, I thought, my goodness, he's doing it so coldly. What I was really thinking was, where's all the shtick, that Zero did.
Right.
And I didn't like what Theo was doing, and little by little, his performance grabbed me, and at the end, I was just destroyed.
Exactly.
Because of what he accomplished.
Yes. Yes. By the way, when you say destroyed, I get chills, and I'll tell you why. I think Fiddler on the Roof is one of the most profound Shalom. Fiddler on the Roof is your title. It's not Shalom Aleicham's title. But you're basing a story on a Shalom Aleichem story. Shalom Aleichem often wrote with a certain sense of bitterness, irony, and criticism of Jewish life. And I think many people, including many, many Jews, see Fiddler on the Roof and do not appreciate the power of the story that you depict on screen, on stage, on screen as well. And that when you say destroyed, if somebody really understands the play, the book, the story, the arc, and if one is really moved by the performances, it's an honest story about Jewish life.
Yeah.
And it's a very troubling story about Jewish life. And I want to make sure everybody understands what the Shalom Aleichem story is, which you were honest with in Fiddler on the Roof, is the story of the Jewish dissolution of a family. Mm-hmm. It begins with this fabulous opening number that you create, Tradition. These are your lyrics?
Yeah.
You write Tradition all yourself. What I mean by that is, you're not paraphrasing Shalom Aleichem in the song Tradition.
No, I took whatever I could from the stories and from other research that I did, but then I melded them all together and made my own lyrics. But the idea for the song, by the way, we had a different opening number. We had an opening number for Golda and the Five Daughters. It was called We've Never Missed a Sabbath Yet, and it was a wonderful number. It's on that 2 CD that you mentioned, the set. But when 6 months before we went into rehearsal, we started to have meetings with Jerry Robbins. And he always began the meeting by saying, what is this show about? And we would say, well, it's about this dairy man. And he said, no, that's the plot. That's not what gives these stories their power. What is that? And it took weeks before one of us said, you know what it is? It's the changing of a way of life.
Exactly.
It's the changing of traditions.
Exactly.
So Jerry said, then you've got to write a new opening number. You have to write a number about tradition and tell the audience what some of these traditions
How brilliant. By the way, you know, again, to me, that's a thrilling story because it's part of the creative process. Here you have, I called you a genius. You are a genius, but you are surrounded by other geniuses.
are. Jerry Robbins was a genius.
Absolutely.
We were very lucky that he chose to do the show.
Okay. And he's pushing you, and he ultimately is, and after what you say is, perhaps weeks of trying to really articulate what's the essence of this musical, you finally get to what is the,
Yeah.
and then he says to you, now go write a song, right? And so Jerry writes the music and you write, by the way, when you and Jerry wrote, which came first, the music or the words?
It was half and half. Sometimes it always started with music first, but by the time we had finished the score,
He would adjust.
Half the lyrics came first.
Okay.
Yeah. But tradition, the music came first, oddly enough. That 4-part counterpoint, that came first.
Da 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 da.
Yeah.
Da 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 da. That comes first.
Yeah.
And then slowly, you know, again, I guess I'm asking you how the creative process in your own brain works. You begin to see something, you begin to hear something. Do you remember how you created Tradition, which is one of the great opening numbers in Broadway musical history? So you're hearing Jerry's, whatever he's doing with it at the outset, and all of it, Tradition, how does that come to you? Do you remember it all?
Well, of course, Jerry set the music in such a way that it would accommodate the word tradition. Da-da-dum, that was supposed to be tradition. Then the rest of it, we knew that the boys would sing, the girls would sing, the mothers and the fathers. And I had done enough research and I had enough memories of what it was like growing up Jewish so that I could write those lyrics. And it was just fun.
Who in the musical is your father or grandfather? Anyone?
When they do, I discovered later that when they do You Love Me, Tevye and Golub are my parents. And the reason I say that is we wrote the song on the road in Detroit. We put it in.
It was not in the original score?
No. During rehearsal, I was watching the scene and I thought, gee, it would be funny if he said, Golda, do you love me? And she said, what? That would be funny. So we got to Detroit and I started that. And then every day I took long walks. And it was very, very difficult to say, now what would they say? Now what would they say? And if I did 6 lines a day, I was happy. At the end of a week, I had something, but I gave it to Jerry Bach and I said, I apologize. I know this doesn't look like a song lyric. It looks like a dramatic scene, but this is all I can do with it. And to my delight, he said it exactly as I wrote it. I didn't have to change anything. So we gave it to Zero and Maria Kornilova, who played Golda. They put it in and it worked. I had tried to end it with a joke because I thought it should have a joke ending. I couldn't find one, so I wrote a different ending. And to my astonishment, when at the first performance, the audience chuckled at the end. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, about the 3rd performance, I was standing in the back, and they sang it, and I started to cry. And I thought, why am I crying? So I left the theater so I wouldn't disturb the audience, and I thought, oh my God, they're what I wish my parents had been. During the Depression, they fought a great deal. There was a lot of unpleasantness. And I thought, these people, they love each other, you know.
Despite. Right? Do you remember the lyrics?
Do I remember the lyrics?
Yeah. The first time I met you was on my wedding day.
Yeah.
I was nervous.
I was shy.
I was nervous, so was I.
Yeah.
But my mother and my father
said we'd learn to love each other.
My father and my mother said we learned to love each other.
Or you can do it the other way. My mother and my father said we learned to love each other.
No, I want to do it your way. Yours way. My father and my mother said we learned to love each other. And
so,
now I'm asking Golda.
Yeah. Do you love me?
Do you love me?
Yeah.
And she says, we've shared a lifetime together. We've shared a bed together.
Yeah.
If that isn't love,
what is?
What is?
Yeah.
Brilliant. You see, you're a genius.
No, Thank you.
brilliant. And but it's very hard to imagine that show without Do You Love Me?
We
After
added-
25 years, it's nice to know. That's
Yeah.
all. It's just nice. And it makes me tear up, unbelievable.
Yeah. We wrote we wrote a number of the best songs that in the show on the road.
Really?
Yeah.
Which ones?
Miracle of Miracles was written on the road.
What a great song.
We didn't have an ending, so Jerry Robbins, we were working on something to open the second act. Joe Stein remembered something his father had told him, that before he came over to America, they looked forward to letters from America because they were so exciting. You know, like Joe said, somebody would write, you know, in America, we only work half a day, 12 hours, you know. So we wrote a song that was Letters from America, and it went into a very active, dancey theme, which was Anna Tevye. And Jerry Robbins was worried about what we were doing, so he brought Hal Prince in before the number was finished. He said, Hal, what do you think? And Hal looked at it and said, you're trying to do a traditional second act opening, an active opening. That's not this show. So he scrapped the number. But while we were on the road, Jerry said, remember that active Anna Tevye, yum-pum-ba-da, yum-pum-ba-da, yabba-dum-ba-da-da, yum-pum-ba-dum. Let's slow it down and write a lyric so that the people who are about to leave Anna Tevye, it's something they can sing. That was his idea, so that was added to the show.
So many moments of brilliance went into this show to make it what it is. In the opening number, by the way, the beggar comes for 1 second. Alms for the poor, alms for the poor.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
And he says, he gives him something. He says, only this much? He says, I had a bad week. And the beggar says,
If you had a bad week, why should I suffer?
where's that come from?
That's Joe's joke.
You understand? That becomes iconic. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You had a bad week. Why should I suffer? Yeah, and it's so Jewish too. And
That's one of the things we were worried about when Topol did it. English was not his first language. All the other Tevyes were very, they knew how to do Joe Stein's dialogue. Topol had a little difficulty with that, so that when I saw the film, I was aware that the verbal humor was not quite as effective as it had been with the other actors, but the rest of it was terrific.
And Norman Jewison did that film.
I'm told that in Yugoslavia, when they were filming, the cast was so impressed by the research he had done.
Jewison done?
Yeah, and the mastery. They said, Norman, we're making you an honorary Jew and changing your name to Norman Christensen.
I would imagine it would be difficult for you, and I mean difficult in the sense it just would be sort of impolitic. It wouldn't be right for you ever to say something negative about anybody who ever played Tevye that you saw. Am I correct? If you didn't like something, would you be comfortable saying it on television?
I've said it about Zero.
You have.
Oh, sure.
You
As a
didn't
matter-
like everything he did in his performance.
When the show opened, I asked Jerry Robbins, I said, how often will you come around? He said, I don't have to keep the show up. You've got a stage manager who'll do that. He said, besides, I don't want to see Zero 2 months after we open because there's no telling what he'll be doing.
Yes.
And it was true. He, to my knowledge, as far as I know, he never ad-libbed dialogue, but he changed staging at will. Sometimes he just went overboard, especially in Tevye's Dream. He just went overboard. The show was running 15 minutes longer because of what he was doing. No matter what he did, the audience adored him. But a critic came up from Kentucky, I remember, to see the show. And when he got back, somebody sent Hal Prince the piece that he wrote. He said, while I was in New York, I saw Fiddler on the Roof. It's a darling show, but do not see it with Zero Mostel. He's distorting the scenes. And Hal said, so Hal wrote him a letter. And he showed it to Jerry Bach and Joe Stein and me before he sent it. It couldn't have been more politic. And what he was saying, in essence, was, Zero, we think you're a genius. Every once in a while, we feel you may cross a line. We'd like to be allowed to speak to you. Zero wouldn't tolerate that much. He screamed when he got that letter. So that's why as I say, when Theo began, and I didn't see all the shtick, I thought, what is he doing? Where's all? We got used to it. even so, there would be things that he would do, which I thought it's hard to say they injured the show because the audience loved what he did. But I felt that is not what Tevye would do.
You're 100% right, and I'm proud of you. Did you like Topol?
Yes, yeah.
You liked him?
I had to get used to the fact, as I say, that his verbal approach was not as funny as but his.
But the one you liked most
he was very
Herschel
powerful.
Bernardi.
And as a matter of fact, we went to New Jersey, I've forgotten where the last tour started with Topol. And this was about, 3 years ago. And I had never seen him that good. He was just, I mean, he was always good. But the performance he gave, my wife and I were just bowled over.
How thrilling, how thrilling.
He was wonderful. And then we were so upset when he heard that he injured his shoulder and he had to stop performing altogether for a while.
Okay, but again, the one you liked the most was Herschel Bernardi.
Herschel.
Yes.
He had humor. He had a natural singing voice. He was paternal. He was strong. He was dramatic. He was disciplined. Wonderful actor. And there was something about his performance that I just liked the best.
So now I come back to the theme of the story that I wanted to talk about, because ultimately the story is the dissolution of Jewish tradition, depicted on screen. Because again, what you have here is, although Tevye has 5 daughters, there are 3 principal daughters in the show.
Yeah.
Right? You have the first daughter, Sailu, falls in love with Muddle, and the father's about to match her with the butcher, and ultimately the issue is, will the daughter have the right to marry somebody she's in love with? Which we should make sure everybody knows. In the Jewish tradition, you may not marry a daughter to a man she does not want to marry. But there certainly was a tradition that there would be matchmaking. And so the question is, will Tevye accept this notion that her daughter has the right to choose someone she loves, and she has to then explain it to Golda? And the answer is yes, and you have my blessing. The second daughter falls in love with a Jew, but the Jew is Perchik, who is sort of like the secular intellectual. Yeah. And he's not part of the observant world, and he's not part of the tradition that Tevye is standing for. And now the second daughter says to his father, the father, but I love him. And in the end, again, you have the soliloquy that Tevye does each time with each of the children, on the one hand and on the other hand. But in the end, again, Tevye says, okay, they're in love. That leads to the Golda song, Do You Love Me? Then comes the third daughter, and now we're talking about Chava, who, there's a ballet scene, and Chava is he has a very special relationship with Chava. He loves Chava very much. She's a little bird. And Chava falls in love with somebody who is Russian. And in essence, symbolizing the non-Jew, as far from the tradition as possible. And yet, Tevye has said yes to one break of tradition, minor, but still a break, has said yes to a bigger break in tradition. Now he's being asked to sanction the biggest break of all. And in the play, when he does the soliloquy, he ultimately says, no, I can't. I would break. He says no. And in the end, the daughter, anyway, runs off with Fiedka, and Golda runs on stage to tell Tevye that his daughter has left. And it is crushing to Tevye. But I think that anybody who plays Tevye has to communicate to the audience that his soul has been ripped out of him. In the very last scene, as they're getting ready to leave, Fiedka and Chava come, and although Tevye will not speak to the daughter who is now with a non-Jew, he speaks to one of his other daughters and basically gives a blessing in a way through a daughter.
He acknowledges that she's not dead. Yeah.
Yes, because originally Tevye says to Golda, they're dead to us, and in the end, they're not. And, it's a very sweet moment, and it's very, very real. And then they get up, and they have to leave Anatevka. Yeah. And the question is, does the fiddler, who is the representation of tradition, come with them to the new world? And I have my own take on that scene, which I played when I did my own performance, that by that time, Tevye is somewhat ambivalent, but in the end, absolutely, tradition comes and the Fiddler comes. It's not quite sure. And the reason I say that is there are many, many Jews who by the time they left the shtetl and the ghetto and the pogroms, they came to a new world. They wanted none of it. But yes, Tevye says, yes, you come with me.
Yeah.
But what we have in your play is a representation of degrees of separation from the core, ending up with the intermarriage, which, Sheldon, is now the quintessential Jewish problem of modern Jewish life. And in some way, the play is, while magnificent and uplifting, the message is troubling, Sheldon. And I wanted to know how sensitive you were to the fact that it's a troubling message. It's a real, honest message, but it's a troubling message. And I wanted to know, to what extent are you aware of it? And does it in any way trouble you?
No, not at all. What troubled us was how to end the show, because Sholem Aleichem does, in the story about Chava, he doesn't give you an answer. At the end, he turns to Sholem Aleichem and says, "What was I to do? I'm her father, you know." And so we said, "Joe, you got to solve this problem." Later, I discovered, to my horror, that Sholem Aleichem had written another story in which Chava comes back, and she has left her husband because she wants to be with her father in exile, and they accept her, and her husband doesn't want to, so she leaves him. And I thought, oh, I don't like that. I like our ending better, you know. That was very troubling to me.
Interesting.
But apparently that's the way Sholem Aleichem looked at the relationship.
Very interesting. When a curtain goes up, and actually, for me, there used to be more of overtures than there are now. A lot of shows don't have overtures.
Yeah.
But the overture of a Broadway musical, the lights go down and the music comes up. It is one of the most stirring things that I ever experience, and I tear up every single time. And I have such respect and admiration for those of you who have been able to create on a level that touches the human heart and the human soul, that gives us a glimpse into who we are in a better way. There is something that you have done, Sheldon, that is immortal and part of the divine.
From your mouth to God's ears.
It is a great pleasure for me to have you at this table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kol tuv v'hatzlacha, many, many more years of success.
Especially from your mouth to God's ears.
Okay, and every now and then I'm going to chase you and we'll sit and talk some more.
Okay.
Fair enough?
It's wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheldon Harnick, the 3-time Tony Award-winning lyricist, best known for creating the lyrics for the Broadway masterpiece Fiddler on the Roof, and you also heard him say She Loves Me, which was one of the first shows I saw and just fell in love with. As always, you're invited to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.